Australia's been lucky to field some of the world's leading experts in medical research, and one of those is Nikolai Petrovsky. He's a Professor of Medicine at Flinders University and Chairman and Research Director of Vaccine Proprietary Limited. Now, vaccines around COVID have sparked some intense community debate around the safety as well as the efficacy, and also around the need to get vaccinated. It has literally divided Australia. However, as the debate continues, there is also now a question about whether there is a need to vaccinate children. Governments are insisting children should, so today we've invited Professor Petrovsky to come on and share his thoughts. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Now, there's a debate that is firming around whether children should be vaccinated with the current COVID vaccine. How do you feel about that?
I think we have to be guided by the evidence and by the facts. So on the one hand, when we look at children, we know already that children are at much lower risk from COVID-19 infection than adults, and particularly elderly adults. So when we're talking about the benefits of a vaccine for an individual, there's clearly a massive benefit to an elderly person getting vaccinated right now, accepting whatever risks come with that vaccination, because their risks from the infection are so great, particularly of being hospitalised and potentially dying of the infection. When we look at young children, the same equation doesn't apply. Children are at much lower risk, dramatically lower risk of being hospitalised or dying from COVID-19 infection. So we can't lump them all together and say the benefits are the same, whether you're elderly or you're a young child. So that's the first thing that we need to factor in. The second thing we need to factor in is, is the safety of the vaccines the same in the elderly as it is in the children? Because whenever we make an assessment about a vaccine, it's a risk-benefit assessment. So as I said, the risks have to be assessed as well as the benefits. We know the benefits are different in children to adults, and we need to put that into the equation. We also know that the risks are different in young people compared to older adults of the vaccines that are currently available. For instance, we've seen a much higher rate of blood clotting with the AstraZeneca adenovirus-based vaccines in young women compared to old women. We also have seen higher rates of myocarditis with the Pfizer mRNA vaccine in young men compared to older men. So, as I said, we need to factor in that the benefits of the vaccine in the young people is clearly less than in the elderly because they're at lower risk. And we also have to factor in the risk of side effects of the vaccines are the opposite. They're actually higher in the young people than they are in the old people. So you really have to run that equation again before answering the question, should we be immunising children or not? As I say, until you reanalyse that data, you can't really answer the question.
So it sounds as though, to my uneducated view, that what you're saying is the equation nearly needs to be inverted. So we've got a high risk from disease for the elderly and a low risk from the vaccine, and in the younger people it would be inverse. So we would have a higher risk from the vaccine and a lower risk from the disease. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, we shouldn't say high risk, we should say higher risk, because the risk from the vaccines is relatively low. So I need to emphasise that. It's not that everyone gets a side effect from the vaccine, but clearly with the side effects we're describing here, particularly the blood clots and also the myocarditis, it's very clear that there's an increased risk of those side effects in younger people when you compare it to older people. So it's a relative equation. We're not talking, as I say, in terms of high overall. We're talking low rates of side effects, but the frequency of them being increased in the younger people.
So what do you think is behind the strategy at the moment to vaccinate our younger people? And does that strategy make sense to someone with your expert knowledge?
So the reason that would be put forward to be vaccinating young people is in fact not the same as, again, the argument to vaccinate elderly people. We vaccinate elderly people to stop them getting sick and dying from infection. When we're looking at younger people, the argument would be that if we don't have younger people immunised, then they may be a transmission vector that's going to maintain the virus in our community. And so although they're not at risk themselves of getting extremely sick, if young people are getting the virus and transmitting the virus to others, then obviously we're going to have a much higher level of virus transmission. So here we're immunising the young people, not ironically to protect them, but to protect the rest of the community. And, you know, so again, it's quite a different purpose for which you're doing this, and you have to assess it and the benefits to the children themselves and separate that from the benefits potentially to the community. The problem I guess I have with it currently is that the current vaccines have really not been demonstrated to prevent transmission. So if the only reason we're vaccinating children is to stop them transmitting the disease, and the vaccines we're vaccinating with them aren't preventing transmission, then we're immunising them unnecessarily. So I would really want to see strong data demonstrating that vaccination actually does prevent transmission of disease in young people and in children before embarking on a large-scale program to immunise all young children for that purpose.
So you're not filling a parent here with any great clarity yet, Professor. What I'm hearing is the current vaccines, we've seen that the viral load or the ability to spread with the Delta especially hasn't gone down. So vaccinating children for the sole purpose of stopping them spreading it seems to be a pointless cause. Again,
it should be guided by strong data. And so I'm not saying that it may not be something that would be recommended in the future or suitable in the future if it was based on hard data. So, you know, I would like to see, you know, data showing that immunization of children is preventing transmission of the virus. And if that was the case, then you could make decisions based on that data. But I'm not aware of any data of that kind at this point in time. So I would say it's premature to be making a decision in the absence of collecting that data. The responsibility is find the data that justifies the action before taking the action.
How do you feel about the government's move, or especially in New South Wales, to take vaccine away from vulnerable First Nations people, those that most likely do have underlying health concerns or are at greater risk then to vaccinate HSC students?
Again, I think it's these are government decisions. I don't have a specific view on it. When vaccines are in short supply, then there does need to be some form of prioritization, and really that is the province of the government and their health advisors, because they are the ones who are purchasing and supplying that vaccine. So, as I say, I don't think that's for me to comment on.
Now, as far as choice goes, Professor, we've heard that it's your choice to get vaccinated or not vaccinated. There's a lot of pressure from both camps going. How is that playing out?
I think that, when we're still at a very early stage in developing these vaccines and collecting data on how effective they are and what their side effect profiles is, I think it's essential that, people are fully informed and have essentially the ability to make or provide informed consent in order to receive the vaccines. This is not a normal situation, and there are a lot of unknowns. And so it's important, like if you're in a clinical trial, you have to provide informed consent, or that's not considered valid or ethical. I think the same applies in this context of vaccines more broadly, where we don't have the level of data that we might with other more traditional vaccines. So I think that choice, or allowing people to make that informed choice, is very important, and that's why I'm against any idea of mandatory vaccination until, again, we have a lot more data that would support that move, because mandatory implies you're removing people's individual rights, and we should be very, very careful and circumspect before doing that, because it can lead to very negative consequences, and also set precedents that we don't want to be setting. And we've seen that obviously in historically in situations like Germany in the 1930s, where individual rights were progressively eroded, and we know the outcome of what happened there.
It definitely seems like the more you're forced into a corner to make a choice, the more hesitant you become. The messaging and communications around this whole saga has been missed by the government, wouldn't you say?
Look, I've always encouraged the government to be very open and transparent, with the Australian people, and bring the Australian people with them on a journey, accepting there's a lot of uncertainty. Unfortunately, I don't think that has happened, and so we have this disconnect where there is a large part of the Australian community who, as you say, are clearly very uncomfortable. I get contacted every day by such people who, are intelligent people. They want to do the right thing, but they feel under enormous pressure, and they would like more information, and they obviously aren't feeling they're getting that information from the government. And as I say, that's very unfortunate, because, as you say, that will just polarize the situation, and it's not in Australia's interest that happens. So I think the government have to be seen to be working with the people, and unfortunately, that's not what's coming across.
In your career, Professor, have you ever seen a division like this, and is it happening within the scientific community as well? Is the debate as heated as what it seems to be in the general community?
You're right. I mean, there are debates going on behind closed doors among vaccine developers and doctors and scientists, many of whom in private will express a lot of reservations about what's happening. But again, there's a sense that in the current political environment, those views can't be expressed publicly. And again, that's a concern, because, I think science and medicine function best in a completely open, transparent environment, where you can express your doubts or reservations or disagreements, and discuss them and try and come to a consensus. And the minute you force all these discussions behind closed doors, of course, you have a situation where people are only hearing one side of the story, and that's never a good situation.
I'm sure Galileo would agree with you, Professor.
Yes, and again, I think there's historical precedents where you don't allow open discussion and disagreement. Inevitably, the consequences are never good. Society functions best when it's completely transparent, and people are allowed to disagree, and we accept that. That's a part of a healthy society. If we try to suppress, one side of the story or one group of people who have one opinion in favour of another, again, that is not a healthy situation to be in.
And Professor, with your synthetic protein-based vaccine, any developments there?
So our vaccine continues to move forward very strongly. We've finished recruitment of a phase 3 clinical trial, which is the very last stage in just under 17,000 individuals. They're all just receiving their second dose as we speak of vaccine. So we're expecting an outcome hopefully in the next 2 to 3 months. And then, if the results are good, obviously we'll be seeking approval of our vaccine, starting overseas, but we're still hopeful that, our vaccine will at some point be able to be made available in Australia.
Any outreach or acknowledgement from the Australian government yet?
No, so we've again just accepted the fact that we're going to have to do this by ourselves without support. We really haven't had any positive interactions recently with our own government.
And the major funder is the American NIH?
Look, we're very, I guess, thankful to the US government for having supported our vaccine programs, in fact, stretching back almost 20 years now. So it's not unique to COVID-19. So they've supported all the research that's, gone into not just this vaccine, but our vaccines, for instance, against pandemic influenza. They aren't able to support our clinical trials because the trials are occurring outside of the United States. But as I say, it's been fabulous to have them supporting our science and believing in our science to get us to this point.
If only the Australian government could look within our own borders with our innovative and excelling medical research that we're renowned for. It seems mind-boggling.
Unfortunately, I mean, it's not the first time that, great Australian developments and great Australian science has had to go overseas to get support. Unfortunately, there is this blind spot where the government, can overlook local developments and it's disappointing, obviously, but it's not surprising, and certainly, it's not the first time, and I suspect it won't be the last time that Canberra, overlooks what's happening here in Australia and instead just focuses on what's happening in the rest of the world.
All right, Professor, thanks so much for your informed and expert opinion today. It's been enlightening.
It's a pleasure.